The sun was setting on the edge of the colony world, its light weak and tired. Dust blew across the narrow streets, carrying the smell of smoke and metal. The colony had always been poor, but lately it felt even worse. Shops closed early, food was hard to find, and people spoke in whispers about war in the far stars. A young man walked through the street, his clothes simple and worn. He was not rich, not powerful, just another worker trying to survive. Every day, he worked in the fields, lifting heavy stones, fixing broken machines, anything to earn enough to eat. He lived alone in a small room, cold at night, empty of comfort, but he never complained. He believed life was hard for everyone here, and he had to endure. That evening, he carried a small piece of bread and a bowl of soup. It was not much, but for him it was enough. He sat down on a broken bench by the road, tired from the day's work. The bread was rough, the soup thin, but after long hours of labor, it felt like a feast. He was ready to eat when he heard footsteps, small, light, and uncertain. Turning his head, he saw two children standing nearby. They were not human, their skin pale blue and their eyes wide and glowing faintly in the dark. Their clothes were torn, their faces thin, and their hands shook as they held each other. They looked like orphans, weak and lost. The man could tell they were hungry, their eyes fixed on his food. They said nothing, but the silence between them spoke louder than words. For a moment, he thought of keeping the food. After all, he had worked all day for this. If he gave it away, he would sleep hungry. But as he looked into their trembling eyes, his heart grew heavy. He remembered being hungry himself when he was a boy, when no one helped him. The memory cut deep, and he could not ignore it. Quietly, he broke the bread in half. He placed the larger piece into the hands of the smaller child. Then he pushed the bowl of soup toward them. "Eat," he said, his voice calm but firm. The children stared at him in shock, as if kindness was something they had forgotten. Slowly, carefully, they tasted the food. Their faces lit up with relief. Their small hands clutched the bread as if it was treasure. The man watched them eat, his stomach empty, but his heart strangely warm. He asked them where their parents were, but they shook their heads. He asked them where they came from, but they stayed silent. He understood then that they carried secrets, or maybe pain, too deep to speak. He did not press them. He only let them finish the food. When they were done, the taller one looked at him. Her voice was soft, almost broken, but strong enough to say, "Thank you, human." Then, without another word, they turned and walked away into the shadows. The man sat there for a long time, the empty bowl before him. He thought of their glowing eyes, their trembling hands, the strange weight in their voices. Something about them felt different, not like other beggars or strangers. But he told himself it was only imagination. He had helped them, and that was enough. Still, in the back of his mind, he wondered if he would ever see them again. The night grew colder, and he returned to his small room. His stomach hurt from hunger, but his heart carried peace. He lay awake, thinking of the children, the way they had eaten, the way they had thanked him. There was something unusual in their eyes, something ancient, something heavy, but soon sleep took him, and the memory drifted like smoke. In the days that followed, life returned to its old rhythm. Work, hunger, sleep, and the endless dust of the colony. He never saw the children again. Some nights he sat on the same bench, hoping to catch sight of them, but the street remained empty. Still, the memory stayed, like a small light in a dark room. He thought maybe it was meaningless, just a small act of kindness in a cruel galaxy. Yet a quiet voice inside him whispered otherwise. That whisper would follow him for years, and one day it would return in a way he could never imagine. Years passed like sand slipping through tired hands. The young man grew older, but life in the colony never grew kinder. The days were always filled with work, sweat, and hunger. The colony world was ignored by the powerful empires, just another forgotten dot on the edge of space. Every morning, he rose before the pale sun touched the ground. He joined the others in the fields, bending his back to cut strange crops that barely grew in the dry soil. Other days he repaired broken engines, patched leaking pipes, or carried heavy loads until his muscles burned. It did not matter what job he took, the pay was always little, the food always thin. But he kept going because if he stopped, there was nothing left. The colony streets were narrow and filled with broken machines. Shops displayed scraps, old tools, and food so expensive that most people only looked, never bought. Children ran barefoot, their laughter sharp but too short. The air always carried the same smell, dust, metal, and the faint taste of smoke. The young man walked these streets every day, but in his heart he felt like a ghost, invisible and small. He sometimes thought of leaving the colony, searching for a better life in the stars. But leaving required money, ships, and powerful names. He had none of these, so he stayed, tied to the same ground where nothing seemed to change. Hope was something distant, like a star seen through smoke. Still, at night, when he lay in his small room, one memory often returned to him. 2 children, pale blue skin, glowing eyes, torn clothes, empty stomachs. He remembered the way they looked at him, the way they ate as if it was their first meal in days, and the soft voice that had whispered, "Thank you, human." He never saw them again, but sometimes he wondered where they had gone. Had they died in the streets, swallowed by hunger? Or had they found shelter, hidden somewhere beyond his reach? The thought stayed, small but sharp. Life grew harder as whispers of war reached the colony. Merchants spoke of empires clashing, of fleets burning entire systems. Refugees arrived, broken ships limping through orbit, carrying people with eyes full of terror. They told stories of planets destroyed, cities turned to ash. The colony became restless, fear spreading like fire through dry grass. The young man watched these strangers and listened. He saw mothers holding children close, old men staring at the ground. He saw soldiers without uniforms, scarred and silent. Something about their faces reminded him of the 2 orphans, lost, abandoned, carrying secrets in their silence. The memory returned stronger, like a voice calling from the shadows of the past. One night, as he walked home from work, he stopped at the same broken bench where he once shared his meal. The street was empty, the lamps dim and flickering. He sat for a while, listening to the quiet. The air felt colder than before, and for a moment he thought he saw movement at the edge of the alley. 2 shapes, small, quick, almost familiar. But when he blinked, they were gone. He laughed at himself, telling his mind to stop chasing ghosts. Yet the unease remained. The days kept dragging forward, but the world around him seemed to change in strange ways. Ships passed in the sky more often, ships not from the colony. Their shapes were sharp, their lights cold. Their engines growled like predators. The elders whispered that outsiders were watching, waiting. No one knew why, but everyone felt the tension growing. The young man noticed patrols near the mines, groups of armed strangers asking questions. They looked at humans with disdain, as if they were nothing more than insects. He felt their eyes on him, cold and measuring. For the first time in years, fear began to replace his tired calm. At night, he dreamed of the children again. But in his dreams, they were older, standing on a mountain of stars, their glowing eyes brighter, their voices louder. They called to him, but he could not understand the words. He woke in sweat, heart beating fast. It felt like the memory was no longer just a memory. It was a warning. The colony carried on, but a storm was gathering. Everyone could feel it, though no one spoke of it aloud. The young man worked, ate, and slept. But deep inside, he knew that the simple meal he once gave had not been the end of that story. It was only the beginning, and the shadow of that beginning was slowly stretching across the stars, toward him, toward all of them. The warning came not with words, but with fire in the night sky. People rushed into the streets, pointing upward, their voices trembling. 3 black ships cut through the clouds, their engines roaring like beasts. They were not merchants, not travelers, but raiders, hungry for easy prey. The young man was walking home when the first blast hit. The ground shook, windows shattered, dust filled the air. Children screamed, families ran. The streets turned into rivers of panic. He froze for only a moment, then ran with the crowd. But he knew there was no safety, no wall strong enough to stop ships like those. The colony guards fired their weak rifles, tiny sparks against steel giants. The raiders answered with thunder, buildings crumbling like sandcastles under waves. The young man covered his face as smoke swallowed the air. He saw neighbors fall, heard cries cut short. Everywhere was chaos, and the colony that always felt tired now felt like a grave. He wanted to run to his small room, to grab what little he owned. But another thought pulled at him. His people, his friends, the children in the streets. He pushed through the crowd, helping an old man who stumbled. He lifted a crying child into his arms, carrying her to a hidden corner. Fear burned inside him, but something stronger pushed him forward. The raiders landed, tall figures stepping from their ships. Their armor was dark, their weapons sharp and humming with energy. They spoke in a language the young man did not know, but their meaning was clear: violence, conquest, power. They tore through houses, searching for valuables, dragging people away. The colony had nothing, yet the raiders took everything, even lives. The young man found himself near the old bench, the place where he once shared his meal. Through the smoke and fire, he saw the same street, now broken and burning. He thought of the two children again, how small they were, how helpless. He wondered if someone had once raided their home, leaving them lost and starving. The memory struck him harder than the blasts. It gave him strength, even as fear tried to crush him. He grabbed a broken pipe from the ground, his only weapon. He stood between a group of raiders and a group of children hiding in the corner. His hands shook, his heart raced, but he did not move aside. The raiders laughed, their voices cold. They raised their weapons, ready to strike him down. For a moment, he thought it would be the end. But something strange happened. A deep shadow fell across the street, swallowing the firelight. The ground vibrated, not from the raiders' ships, but from something larger. Everyone looked up, even the raiders, their laughter dying in their throats. Above the colony hung a massive shape, its size blotting out the stars. A starship, enormous and silent. Its hull shimmered with strange markings. Its engines glowed with power far beyond anything the colony had ever seen. The people gasped, the raiders froze. The young man lowered his pipe, eyes wide with disbelief. The ship descended slowly, its light bathing the broken streets. For the first time that night, the screams quieted, replaced by silence heavy with fear and awe. The young man felt his chest tighten. Was this a new enemy, another conqueror, or was it something else? A voice crackled through the air, carried by machines but clear and sharp. It spoke in a common tongue, strong and commanding. We are not here for your colony. We are here for the human who once shared his food. The word struck like thunder, leaving everyone speechless. The young man blinked, confused. Him? Why him? The raiders looked at one another, unsettled. They were killers, but even they could feel the weight of that voice. The massive ship above them was not one they wished to challenge. The young man dropped the broken pipe, his body shaking. How could anyone remember him? After so many years, after so many lost faces. And yet, the shadow of the ship remained, waiting, watching, as if the past itself had returned, wrapped in steel and power. The shadow of the starship stretched across the colony like a giant hand. Its engines hummed with a deep sound that shook the air. Even the raiders, who feared nothing, now stood frozen, their weapons hanging useless in their hands. The people of the colony looked upward, eyes wide with fear and hope. The young man could not move. His legs felt heavy as stone. The voice from the sky repeated, calm and powerful. We are here for the human who once shared his food. The words echoed through the broken streets, carrying weight like thunder. Whispers spread through the crowd. Who do they mean? Which human? All eyes slowly turned to him, the man who stood near the old bench. He felt exposed, as if the stars themselves were watching. He wanted to deny it, to hide, but deep inside he knew the truth. Somehow, impossibly, the past had come back. The raiders began to retreat, uneasy under the ship's shadow. They had come as hunters, but now they looked like prey. One of them shouted in their harsh tongue, pointing at the man. The young man's heart pounded, his throat dry. Before the raiders could act, a beam of light struck the ground before them. It was not a weapon, but a signal, a warning. The raiders stumbled back, fear replacing arrogance. Then the ship opened. A great door slid apart with a low growl, light spilling out like a rising sun. A ramp descended slowly, metal gleaming. Heavy steps echoed as figures walked down. The people gasped. Even the raiders took a step back. From the ship emerged two tall figures dressed in armor that glowed with strange energy. Their presence filled the air with power, authority, and something older than war. The young man's breath caught in his chest. The armor was unfamiliar, the weapons strange, yet the eyes were unmistakable, glowing faintly in the dark, just as they had so many years ago. The pale blue skin, the sharp features, though now older, stronger, and unshaken. He knew them at once, though his mind resisted the truth. The two orphans he had once fed stood before him, no longer children, but commanders. The taller one stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. Her voice was clear, steady, carrying both memory and command. You gave us food when we had nothing. You gave us kindness when the world gave us none. Now we have returned. The crowd fell silent, their fear replaced by awe. The raiders shifted uneasily, their courage crumbling. The young man shook his head, unable to believe. "Ow!" he whispered, his voice breaking. "You were just children, lost and starving." The shorter figure stepped forward, his armor shining with strange symbols. "Children grow," he said, his voice deep and calm, "and we grew with your gift in our hearts. We survived, we built, we rose. And every step we took, we remembered the human who shared a simple meal." The raiders tried to regroup, their leader shouting orders. But the starship above hummed louder, lights burning brighter, a warning that a single wrong move would mean their end. The raiders' confidence broke. They backed away, retreating to their ships. The colony watched in stunned silence as their tormentors fled like frightened animals. The young man stood rooted, his pipe still in his hand, useless now. The two figures approached him, their steps heavy but graceful. They stopped before him, taller than any human, glowing eyes soft but powerful. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, they bowed their heads. A gesture of respect, not demanded, but given freely. The taller one spoke again, her voice carrying across the ruins. "We remember your gift, and now we return with ours." The people of the colony gasped. Some wept, some whispered prayers, some simply stared. The young man felt his chest tighten, his mind spinning. How could one meal, one act of kindness, echo across years and stars? Yet here they were, proof standing before him in armor and light. The children he once saved had become saviors themselves. Above them, the starship loomed like a guardian. Its engines whispered of power beyond imagination. Its weapons gleamed with fire strong enough to break empires. And it was here, not to conquer, but to honor a human. The young man's knees weakened, his heart heavy with shock and wonder. He had been a poor worker, forgotten by the galaxy. But now the galaxy itself seemed to bow to him. The taller figure reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You gave us hope when we were shadows," she said. "Now let us give your people hope when they are in darkness." Her words carried a promise, a weight that shook the ground more than any weapon. The young man closed his eyes, his mind still trying to catch up. But deep inside, he knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The colony was silent after the raiders fled. Only the crackle of broken fires and the hum of the great starship filled the air. The people stared at the two armored figures standing before the young man. No one spoke. No one dared, for they all felt they were seeing something beyond ordinary life. The taller figure lowered her helmet, revealing her face fully. Her skin was pale blue, marked with faint lines of light like rivers under skin. Her glowing eyes held both strength and sorrow. She looked at the young man, not as a stranger, but as someone remembered across time. "We were children once," she said, her voice carrying softly yet firmly. "Hungry, forgotten, lost in streets that did not care. You gave us food, you gave us life." The shorter figure removed his helmet as well. His face was sharper, his jaw set with authority, but his eyes glowed with the same memory. "We wandered alone that night," he said. "No one looked at us, no one spoke, except you. You shared what little you had, when you had nothing yourself. That moment carved a path for us, one we never left." The young man stood frozen, his heart heavy. He remembered that night, the bread, the thin soup, the way their hands had trembled. He remembered their voices, soft and broken. And now those voices returned with power that could shake worlds. His hands shook, not from fear, but from disbelief. "I only gave you food," he whispered, "only a meal." The taller figure smiled faintly, but her eyes burned with fire. "No gift is small when it comes from the heart," she said. "That night we were not only hungry in body, but starving in spirit. Your kindness gave us more than food. It gave us reason to keep moving." The crowd murmured, their fear turning slowly into awe. They had always seen the young man as one of them, poor, ordinary, invisible. Yet now they saw him reflected in the eyes of warriors. Warriors who commanded ships larger than cities. Warriors who carried fleets under their names. The shorter figure stepped closer, his armor glowing brighter under the ruined lamps. "We are not only survivors," he said. "We are heirs. Children of a royal bloodline hunted across the stars, betrayed, abandoned. When you found us, we had nothing, no family, no power, no future. But your kindness gave us the strength to survive, to rebuild, to rise." Gasps filled the colony streets. Royal bloodline. The words felt unreal in such a broken place. The people had lived with dust and hunger so long that stories of kings and empires felt like myths. But now the myths stood alive before them, armored and unshaken. The young man looked at them with wide eyes, his voice trembling. "You, princes, rulers, and yet I saw only children." The taller one nodded, her face calm. "Because that is what we were, children stripped of everything. But that night, under broken lamps and dust, you gave us dignity back. We swore we would not forget." The starship above shifted, its engines growling as if echoing their vow. Lights rippled across its hull like flowing rivers of fire. The people looked up, fear replaced by pride. That massive ship was not an enemy. It was an ally, and it had come because of one man's act of kindness. The shorter figure lifted his hand, signaling. A projection flared in the air, bright and sharp. It showed a map of stars, systems burning, fleets clashing, empires collapsing. "This galaxy is at war," he said, his tone heavy. "Old powers fight for control. New powers rise from shadows, and the weak are crushed between them. Yet even in this storm, a single kindness has weight." He turned to the young man, eyes glowing like twin fires. "You gave us life, and now we give you our strength. You asked for nothing, but we owe you everything." The taller figure added, her voice strong, "Your colony will not be forgotten. Your people will not be abandoned. You saved 2 orphans. Now 2 commanders stand with you." The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with tears, with gasps, with cries of disbelief. Mothers held their children tighter. Old men fell to their knees. They had been ignored for so long, treated as weak and worthless. Now they stood under the protection of a starship that blotted out the sky. And it was because of one poor worker, one simple man who had once shared his food. The young man's knees grew weak, but he stood tall. He felt their words sink into his chest, heavy and real. He wanted to argue, to deny, to say he was no savior, no hero. But deep inside, he understood. A choice made in hunger years ago had grown into this moment. A moment that would change not only his life, but the life of his entire people. The taller figure extended her hand to him. "Walk with us," she said. "See what your kindness has built." The young man looked at her hand, at the glowing armor, at the eyes that once trembled in fear. Slowly, he placed his hand in hers. The crowd watched in silence as he was lifted, no longer just a poor worker, but a man whose kindness had lit a path across the stars. The night air trembled with the hum of the Starship above. Its shadow stretched over the broken colony, hiding the scars of battle under a blanket of light. The people gathered around the young man, their faces filled with hope and disbelief. The two commanders stood before him, waiting, offering power that could bend empires. The taller one spoke, her voice calm but strong. "You gave us life when we were nothing. Now we offer you everything. Say the word, and our fleets will follow your command." The crowd gasped, their eyes wide. For a man who once worked the fields and patched broken machines, this was a crown beyond imagination. But the young man only lowered his head, his hands trembling. He thought of the dust, the hunger, the cries of children hiding in the ruins. He thought of the old man he had helped in the streets, the mother clutching her child during the raid. He thought of himself, poor, ordinary, no one important. And then he raised his eyes, steady and clear. "I do not want fleets," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I do not want gold, or thrones, or power. What I want is safety for my people. Protect them, give them peace, give them a life without fear." The crowd stirred, whispers rising. Some expected him to claim riches, others expected him to kneel for power. But he asked only for his people, for the colony forgotten by all. The commanders looked at one another, their glowing eyes meeting in silent agreement. The shorter one nodded, his voice deep as he spoke. "This is why humans are different. Others take, others demand, but you ask only for others." Above them, the great starship pulsed with light, as if answering his words. A signal spread across the sky, and in moments smaller ships appeared, dozens, then hundreds, filling the horizon, each one carrying the same mark of the commander's fleet. The people fell to their knees, all breaking their fear. They had never seen such strength, never imagined such guardians. The raiders, still watching from afar, panicked. Their small ships lifted off the ground, retreating into the night like frightened insects. The commanders did not even chase them, for to them, the raiders were beneath notice. The power in the sky alone was enough to end the threat. The young man felt a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. It was the taller commander, her eyes glowing softly. "You asked not for yourself, but for your people," she said. "That is why you are worthy. Your colony will never be alone again." The shorter commander raised his hand, sending commands through invisible signals. Shields unfolded around the colony, glowing barriers of light wrapping the skies. Defense towers rose from hidden compartments in the ships, weapons ready but silent. The broken streets were lit by a glow of protection. For the first time, the people felt what safety truly meant. Tears filled the eyes of the colony's elders. Children clapped. Mothers held their little ones close. The young man watched, his chest heavy with emotion. He had asked for nothing, yet now his people had everything they needed to live without fear. Still, deep inside, he knew this was not the end. Power this great would draw eyes, hungry and jealous. Other empires would see, would question, would want to know why a forgotten colony now had the guard of giants. The storm of war was still out there, waiting, and now his people stood in the middle of it. The taller commander leaned closer, her voice only for him. "You lit a flame long ago, and flames attract both warmth and danger. Are you ready to carry this burden?" The young man's throat tightened, but he did not look away. "I'm only one man," he said, "but I will not run from what I began." Her eyes glowed brighter, pride hidden in their light. "This is why we came back," she whispered. "You are not a king, not a soldier. yet your heart carries more weight than empires. The shorter commander raised his voice so all could hear. Tonight, the galaxy will remember this place. Not because of fleets or fire, but because of a human who asked only for others. The crowd erupted, not in fear this time, but in cries of strength. They raised their hands, calling his name, honoring him, though he shook his head in protest. He was still the same man, still poor, still simple, still unsure. But to them, he was proof that even in dust, greatness could rise. The Starship engines pulsed again, shaking the ground like thunder. The sky above the colony was now filled with light. And in that light, the young man stood tall, not with weapons, not with crowns, but with the quiet strength of someone who gave without asking. And because of that, an entire world now stood under the shield of stars. The colony woke to a new dawn, where once the streets had carried only dust and silence. Now they carried light. Shields shimmered faintly above the sky. Starships circled like guardians. Children laughed without fear. Merchants opened shops with steady hands, and hope returned to a place long forgotten. The young man walked among his people, but they no longer looked at him as before. They whispered his name with reverence, as if he were more than flesh and bone. He felt uneasy at first, for he had not fought battles, had not commanded ships. All he had done was share a meal long ago, yet that small act had become the root of this change. The two commanders stayed near, though they carried the weight of entire fleets. To the people they were legends, to enemies they were terrors. But to the young man, they were still the same children. Children he had once seen trembling in hunger, hands clutching bread as if it were gold. Now they stood in armor, heads high, but when they looked at him, their eyes still carried gratitude. One evening, as the colony gathered in the square, the commanders called all to listen. The taller one spoke first, her voice strong enough to reach every corner. "We have seen empires rise and fall," she said. "We have seen kings lose their crowns, soldiers lose their cause, and planets lose their fire. But in all our journeys, no act carried the weight of one human sharing his only meal." The shorter commander lifted his hand, a projection of stars glowing in the air. Systems burning, fleets clashing, war devouring the galaxy. "This is the age of power," he said, his tone heavy. "Armies believe strength lies only in weapons. Rulers believe greatness lies only in crowns. But they are blind. They do not see the strength of the human heart." The people watched, their eyes wide. The young man stood silent, unsure, but the words of the commanders struck like fire. The taller one pointed to him, her armor shining under the lights. "This human was poor, forgotten, invisible," she said. "He had nothing, yet he gave something, and because of that, we live, we rise, and we return." The crowd erupted in cries, not of fear but of pride. For the first time, they did not see themselves as weak. They saw themselves reflected in him, in the simple act of kindness that had changed everything. The commanders raised their voices together. "This is why humans are different. This is why humans are special." The words carried beyond the colony, beyond the world. For the fleet's signal sent the speech across the stars. Other colonies heard it, other forgotten humans whispered it. Even alien empires caught fragments, and in their courts and palaces, rulers frowned. For they felt a new story growing, one they could not easily crush. The young man stood still, his heart heavy. He had never wanted fame, never wanted titles, but now his name traveled through the void, carried on the voices of two commanders who owed him everything. He looked at the children of the colony, laughing freely, and he realized that the burden he carried was not a curse, but a gift. Because if one meal could do this, what else could humanity bring? That night, under the shields of light, he walked to the old bench. It was broken, burned, but still standing. He sat as he once had years ago, alone, holding food in his hands. This time it was more, bread and soup enough for many. He watched as children approached, not fearful, but smiling. He gave them food, as he had before, and in their eyes he saw the same spark he once saw in the orphans, a spark that could one day change the stars. Above him, the starship drifted like a silent guardian. The galaxy beyond was still burning, still dangerous. But here, in this forgotten place, a light had been born. A light not of weapons, but of kindness. The commanders watched from afar, their voices quiet. This is why we returned. This is why we will stand with him. The young man lifted his face to the sky. He was not a king, not a soldier, not a hero in the way stories were told. He was only human, but in being only human, he had become something greater. For the galaxy would now remember, not fleets, not crowns, not thrones, but a human who shared a meal. And because of that, the galaxy would never see humans the same way again.